Hello, and welcome back to the Murakami Companion podcast, a show inspired by the works of Haruki Murakami, where we analyze his body of work in its entirety. Today we'll be talking about Absolutely on Music, Conversations with Seiji Ozawa from 2016. This book is non-fiction, it's just a wonderful transcription of conversations between Haruki Murakami and Seiji Ozawa. This is a sensible book to talk about because at the time of this recording it's been around a year since Master Ozawa passed away in February 6, 2024 at 88 years old. Seiji Ozawa was a Japanese conductor known internationally for his work as music director of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, the San Francisco Symphony, and especially the Boston Symphony Orchestra, where he served from 1973 for 29 years. After conducting the Vienna's New Year concert in 2002, he was director of the Vienna State Opera until 2010. In Japan, he founded the Saito Kinen Orchestra in 1984, their festival in 1992, and the Tokyo Opera No Mori in 2005. While being an already successful musical director in his youth, Leonard Bernstein, the famous American music director, made Ozawa his assistant in the New York Philharmonic in 1961. Absolutely on Music, this book, works in two ways. On one hand, it's a portrait of Seiji Ozawa, built from words instead of paint on a canvas. This is a person that Murakami considered that had to be known more intimately by the general public. He is an exceptional human being who lived an exceptional life. And while some very interesting stuff happened in the life of Seiji Ozawa in these last 8 years between the book and his passing, the book does cover most of his life. On a side note, his very last concert took place on November 22, 2022 with the Saito Kinen Orchestra, where he conducted in a wheelchair Beethoven's Egmont Overture, which was broadcasted live to Koichi Wakata, an astronaut on board of the International Space Station. How cool is that? On the other hand, Absolutely on Music works if you are a musician, or if you have an interest in classical music or its history in the second half of the 20th century or the early 2000s, or if you're interested in learning about it. If you know nothing about these topics, this book it's not the best place to start. This is not a class about classical music, it's a conversation between two people that know a lot about classical music, and they are not going to explain it from zero. Nonetheless, if you are one of those people that listens to every piece of music that Murakami mentions in his books, this is the book for you too. You may have problems reading along with the music because sometimes they mention a few pieces that are like 40 minutes long, but either stop reading and listen to the music or leave the music for later. Anyways, this book is definitely a whole experience. It's hard to get through for some people at points when it gets a little bit too geeky about classical music, comparing recordings of the same piece between different directors or different soloists, but it makes you travel to that era, that universe of Seiji Ozawa and Leonard Bernstein and other great musicians of the time. And because it's not fictionalized, because it's the literal transcription of a conversation, it's oral history put in paper. It's not romanticized, it does not have a sepia filter. It's not trying to tell us that things were better in the old days or that things were worse in the old days. They just were the old days. Seiji Ozawa is a man who worked with the greats of the times in his early days, and in his later days he worked with the greats of the more modern times. And if we are talking about symphonic music, we could be talking about Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart, or we could be talking about something more modern like, for example, John Williams. And both are phenomenal, but the point is that the old composers are still great. All classic music is still great. Murakami had said that he doesn't write thinking about his current audience, but an hypothetical audience from 100 years in the future. I don't know how the future audience will feel about this book. We certainly seem to have more interest in composers right now, because, honestly, there was a movie about Leonard Bernstein released not too long ago, and it was very well received. But I don't know if people 100 years from now will rewatch that movie to learn about Leonard Bernstein, in the same way we aren't really watching the movie Amadeus to learn about Mozart. We are actually just watching a piece of entertainment. But maybe the thing with absolutely music is that it is told firsthand from the man himself, and that is something special. I think that nowadays we have a lot of formats which you can find on the internet where there is relevant artists from today, and you can find hours and hours and hours of interviews. But I think that the fact that this is not like a whole recording with cameras and staff and people behind the scenes watching the two people talking, but it's an intimate talk between two friends, I think that sets it apart. It's really something else. And I hope that by now you have decided if you want to read this book or not. Either way, you can get absolutely on music pretty much anywhere where good books are sold. For a book by Murakami that is non-fiction, this is surprisingly easy to get. It's widely available. If you want to support this podcast, or you just like t-shirts, coffee mugs, or art prints, we got a few digital stores where you can find all of that and more, featuring the cover artwork for this episode. There will be one design for each episode release of this podcast.